You mentioned Phil. If he was injected with truth serum and you got to ask him one question, what would that be?
Was it worth it? The vindication for Phil may come over time, and he may yet wind up on that first tee at Augusta with Tiger Woods in 20 or 30 years. And um, he may be a Ryder Cup captain down the road. It's not going to happen in 24 at Bethpage, which seemed to be his birthright. So we don't know yet how this is all going to play out for Phil. I think in his heart of hearts, he would say it was worth it because it's just who he is as a person. He has to be right. And he has to feel like he has control over every situation. And he kind of does on LIV. Like he's changed his destiny. So but that would be interesting. I would love to know the answer to that myself.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a very special edition of the Whole Story Podcast. This is Robby and Jonathan, and we are going to skip the normal recap today. We've got a very special guest, Alan Shipnuck. Let me read a quick little bio of Alan here. So, spent a long time, I think 25 years as a writer with Sports Illustrated and Golf Magazine. He's won, I think, 13 first place awards from the Golf Writers Association of America. Written 9 books, including Phil, Blood, Sweat, and Teas, and then The Swinger with his friend Michael Bamberger. And currently, he is a partner and executive editor at the Fire Pit Collective, which is a golf media company. They do great work. I'm sure those that might be listening to this have seen it. They do excellent stuff. And today, this podcast will be released on Thursday. Today's Wednesday. Yesterday, October 17th. A new book came out, Live and Let Die. So, Alan, welcome to the Whole Story Podcast. I promise this is going to be a safe space.
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm disappointed if I don't want to be too safe. I mean, we don't want to bore your listeners, but I appreciate you guys having me. This will be fun.
Yeah. So how have things been going? You've got this incredible task of, hey, you got to write a book within a year. They kind of said, hey, here's your next book. We need it done in a year. How have things been going over the last, let's say, year and even since the book released yesterday?
Yeah, well, I am on some high blood pressure medication, so that may be a tip off. But it's I mean, it was an intense publishing schedule. Like I felt like I had this piano suspended above me on this fraying rope, and that was what the deadline was for the better part of a year. It was originally due June 1st. That was a Thursday. My editor's like, "Oh, I'm going out of town. Just take until Monday the 5th." It's like, great. Happy to have a few extra days. Put a few more coats of polish on it. Pressed send late on the night of the 4th, essentially. And the 5th was one of the happiest days of my life. I was just so carefree. I slept in, I got a massage, I took a bath, I took a nap, took my kids out for dinner. I was just like, this crushing weight had been lifted. I woke up the next morning and the world was on fire. That's when the framework agreement was announced, and Jay and Yasir were on CNBC. And that was a tough day. But in the end, Simon Schuster let me take it down to the wire, and I added probably another 15,000 words at the back. I went through the whole manuscript, of course, updated it, tweaked it, changed some verb tenses, added some foreshadowing. And I'm happy the way it played out, because if the framework agreement had been announced when the book was already at the printers, I would have been devastated. It would have been a gaping hole in the story. This way, it's all there. And, some folks have been like, oh, you can't, how can you release the book now? We don't know the ending, but I mean, we really do. There's only 3 possibilities how this agreement's going to go. Either consummated as is, blows up entirely, or this middle ground that seems to be emerging where the Saudi influence and equity is diluted with some U.S. investment. And so anyway, I cover all those different scenarios in the last chapter. So I think I'm covered come what may, but this story is so unexpected and there's always twists and turns. It's just been like riding a bucking bronco this whole time.
You didn't know it was going to be like a choose your own adventure book at the end, did you?
Yeah, I know I might steal that line. Actually, that's pretty good. Yeah, it is really it's wild how I mean, you have this conflict in the Middle East that would appear to have absolutely nothing to do with professional golf, but the PGA Tour puts out this statement, of support for Israel, and then MBS comes out supporting Palestine very publicly and vocally, and that just kind of throws into sharp relief that there's a very big difference culturally, politically, institutionally between the PIF and the tour, and they're trying to hammer out this compromise, and things that happen in faraway lands can still impact it in a profound way. And so it's just the story's a monster. I mean, it just consumes everything in its path and just grows bigger and bigger, and it's been remarkable trying to chronicle it all, and to write this book as things were unfolding in real time was a fun challenge, I'll say that.
Well, and even beyond real challenge, like I like golf, but the history that you bring out of really almost like multiple attempts for a live concept over, I mean, decades. I was thinking, how did you research all of this in just a year? I mean, there's so much information and so much detail. Can you share just a little bit, a little sneak peek of what someone might be interested in, or maybe something that piqued your interest in terms of how it developed over decades of time?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I mean, I did have to become sort of a master of a lot of different topics, whether it was the history of Saudi Arabia, the schism in 1968, where the PGA Tour was born out of rebellion when it broke away from the PGA of America, Greg Norman's life and times and his attempts to start this world tour in the 90s. And you could say the story starts then, with Shark. He came from this little island in the middle of nowhere. Like, he had this vision that golf could be a global force, and he was right. And he talked this, fellow Australian iconoclast Rupert Murdoch into paying the bills, and Norman was going to launch this world tour, but his fatal mistake was he didn't get the buy-in from the other players and from the PGA Tour, and he was outfoxed, outmaneuvered, and humiliated by Tim Finchem, the tour commissioner, who then turned around and stole Norman's idea and created the World Golf Championship franchise. And that's the beginning of the story. That's how the book begins. And then you fast forward, there's this London lawyer named Andy Gardner, who's just an obsessive golf fan. And like you, the three of us consume a lot of golf, and we can probably all agree that the PGA Tour product and the European Tour had gotten a little bloated, a little stale, a little tired, needed to be refreshed. And so Gardner, he was pretty well connected guy. He started talking to stakeholders in the game, like Roy McIlroy, like Keith Pelley, CEO of the European Tour, and just started writing down on these yellow legal pads, like how to reinvent golf as we know it. And he was a clever guy, and he eventually typed up this painstakingly detailed prospectus. It's 116 pages on reimagining professional golf, and it's well done. And he shopped it around. He got $500 million from Rain Capital. He got $500 million from the Public Investment Fund. But, Andy Gardner was an idealist. He was not a closer. He just couldn't launch this thing. Ultimately, the Saudis lost faith in him, and they cut and pasted his entire idea and turned it into LIV Golf. And so it's remarkable that this gigantic story that has affected everyone in the professional golf world, and reputations have been destroyed, legacies have been shattered, fortunes have been amassed. It starts with this bored guy in London just noodling on this yellow legal tablet. And I trace how this little idea just spread like a virus through the entire golf world. And it's just incredible that one dude with an idea could change golf history so profoundly. So it was really fun to trace all of that. And I learned so much along the way, because, I was aware of the PGL. Everyone heard about it, had been knocking around, but I stopped paying attention because it'd been years of talk and it never launched. But I didn't really fully grasp how that was what created the strategic alliance between the PGA Tour and the European Tour, because the PGL was trying to get on the European Tour schedule and become their partner. And Jay Monahan swooped in and cut him off at the knees. That created this alliance between what used to be competing tours. And so so many dominoes fell just based on the dream of one guy.
Yeah. You had Michael Bamberger on your the Fire Drill podcast the other day, and he asked a great question, or he made a great statement. I'm going to read it. He said that with your book, it says, given the context and history, or you've given context and history an incredible upheaval in professional golf. But the real value is that it's not just about golf, it's about the modern condition, about more is more, greed, it's never enough, global interest in a narrow thing, how you buy status, and so on and so on. So I think he's a professional writer, and you guys have known each other for a while, but I think he summed up what you were trying to do very perfectly. But I got to ask, are there any heroes in this story? Because it seems like, I read your book. I haven't read a book this fast, and I don't know when, from cover to cover.
I love it.
But
It's college.
it seems like we're looking at like a Breaking Bad, right? Like you're watching the show, and everybody's kind of a villain or kind of a bad guy, and you're just pulling for the lesser of the bad guys. So, are there any heroes in this story?
That's an interesting comparison. I like that. It's part of what drew me to this whole tale is that I don't think there's heroes and villains. I think that everybody has competing and contradictory impulses and motivations. And you take Greg Norman, he makes a pretty good bad guy. He's got this runaway ego. He's been trying to blow up the golf establishment for a long time. But at the same time, there's a purity to his beliefs. Like he always has felt golf should be more global. And he's been fighting for it all along. When Seve Ballesteros was battling with the PGA Tour and the European Tour, which actually left him off a Ryder Cup team because he didn't conform to tour rules. Norman was his staunchest ally. And his vision comes from a very selfless place, that he knows how much golf changed his life, and that it can be that force for good for people in faraway places. And so it kind of gives you a little more empathy. And then I talk about his, Norman seems to have this hole in him that he cannot fill, no matter how many trophies he wins or how many Ferraris he buys or whatever it is. And then you learn about like this what drove him through his whole life was his, basically trying to earn the approval of his father. And at the Masters, when he blows the 96 Masters, like the worst choke job in golf history, and Nick Faldo gives him that hug on the last green. And afterwards in the locker room, Norman says to a confidant, like, my dad never hugged me. That was the best hug I've ever gotten. And it's like, it kind of softens your feelings for the guy. Same thing with Yasir Al-Rumayyan, the guy who runs the Public Investment Fund, and he's like the ultimate shot caller in golf right now. He makes a good bad guy because he's from this kind of this cloistered society, and he's a very shadowy figure, and he has all the money and all the power, but he loves golf as much as any of us do, and he believes in the game, and he's just a golf tragic, and he wants people to play the game in Saudi Arabia. He thinks it can improve society. He thinks it can be again, like this bridge to a different life and a different way of being. And it's a very pure impulse he has. Now, at the same time, he is trying to advance, the interests of this very oppressive regime, and his boss is a very scary mofo in MBS. And so he's not pure either, but there's some redeeming qualities to him. And, even when he goes on TV with Jay Monahan, like he was very humble. He could have been taking the ultimate victory lap. He had won this battle, and he could have humiliated Monahan, but he was happy to kind of be this cordial, conciliatory figure. So, and you go on down the list, Rory seems like a hero to a lot of people, and he has been a great statesman for the tour, but he's also been one of the biggest trolls in this whole saga. And he's made it very personal. He's taken a lot of shots at individual LIV golfers, at Norman, at the whole thing. And he helped kind of poison the discourse. And, it's something the LIV guys all roll their eyes about Rory being celebrated as this white knight, because, Rory has tremendous financial interests tied to the PGA Tour that he's fighting to protect. And so I think this is a classic example of multiple things can be true at once for all of these guys. Like some of their motives are honorable and admirable, and some of them are very selfish and very destructive. And so there's not really the clear cut hero villain, dichotomy. It's everyone is complex and layered, and I like that.
Well, I think you said it best. Money always wins, right? Like money is the center of everything.
Yeah, and I mean it's kind of a theme that runs through the book too. Is like the idealists don't fare well. Rory's idealism is what drove him to be this advocate for the tour. And then in the end, like the money guys came in very ruthless fashion, just like, tore his heart out and stomped on it in soft spikes. And, even Greg Norman, you could say he was an idealist, this vision he had of this global tour. Tim Finchem did the same thing to him. It's just, there's other people along the way, and yeah, money is such a corrosive force, and it came into the game in a way that no one could ever have imagined, and it became like this, this very revealing. It's like an X-ray machine of these guys and their beliefs and their values. And like a guy like John Rahm was elevated through all this because he was so classy. He always said did the right thing. And I loved his answer when they said, well, if this framework agreement goes through, should you get paid as a reward for staying loyal to the tour? And he like scoffed. He's like, I'm getting paid plenty. I'm doing great. Like I don't need that money. I don't deserve that money. Like that was revealing of who he is as a person. And then obviously a lot of guys, became voracious and they couldn't get enough of the money, and that's all that mattered to them. And so it's been interesting because we've learned so much about so many people in this story.
Yeah, I think the money aspect is interesting because even when LIV was happening, you could tell some of the guys were taking because they were, I don't know, money grubbing is the right term, but I think everyone sort of wants more. But then there's others that go, listen, they're offering me a lot of money and my family's going to be taken care of. We always talk about how money doesn't necessarily expose, but it definitely reveals who you are.
Yeah, and the LIV players have all been painted with the same brush, that they just took the money and they sold out. And obviously an element of that is certainly true. The money was the big inducement, but a lot of these guys went there for other reasons. For Phil, he had to be validated as this agent of change and the smartest guy in the room. We all know that Phil is obsessively in need of that adulation. And so yes, the money was huge, but it was also a chance to be celebrated as this maverick and as this game changer. Like take Patrick Reed, Sergio Garcia, they had totally worn out their welcomes on the PGA Tour. Their colleagues didn't like them. They were always feuding with essentially management. And LIV was just a fresh start in an environment that caters more to the players. The joy and the relief that they kind of exude at these LIV events because they've let go of a lot of bad mojo. And so, yeah, the money was a factor, of course, but there was other things going on there. And you can go down the list of a lot of these LIV guys, and there was a lot at play beyond just the dollars. And again, that's what makes it more interesting. If people are motivated only by money, then it would be kind of flat and predictable. But there was other things happening that made the decisions more complex and more nuanced.
Yeah, you mentioned Phil, and I highly recommend your book entitled "Phil" to everybody. A great kind of story of his life and everything. But let's ask this: if he was injected with truth serum and you got to ask him one question, what would that be?
Was it worth it?
What do you think his answer would be?
Well, the truth serum would make it more interesting. I mean, Phil put a lot on the line here. Ryder Cup captaincy, honorary starter at the Masters, a place in the CBS Tower if he wanted it. Even though he was near the end of his playing days, some of the most coveted ceremonial and honorary positions were his for the taking. And but he had been feuding with the tour his entire career, and he had this vision, much like Andy Gardner, that things could be different. And there was a touch of idealism in what Phil was after. And on some level, he's been vindicated. I mean, one of his primary talking points to me in that very freighted phone call was that appears at the end of the Phil Mickelson biography was that, the tour was sitting on all this money. They need to pay the players more. Well, as soon as LIV Golf arrives, all the players on tour got to, double or triple, 2 or 3x times raise. I think Phil was right about that. And that the players need to be more involved in the governance, have a bigger say in what was happening on the PGA Tour. That's certainly proven to be correct. The way, Jay Monahan and Jimmy Dunn did this end around the entire governance structure of the tour. And then the players have fought back, they're taking more seats on the board. And, Phil was right about that too. So he gave up a lot. Those things may eventually come back around to him if the game gets put back together. And Rahm was one of the players who said it. I think a lot of players, as this has played out, have realized that Phil was correct about a lot of things. He's certainly helped give them massive pay raises. So the vindication for Phil may come over time, and he may yet wind up on that first tee at Augusta with Tiger Woods in 20 or 30 years. And he may be a Ryder Cup captain down the road. It's not going to happen in 24 at Bethpage, which seemed to be his birthright. So we don't know yet how this is all going to play out for Phil. I think in his heart of hearts, he would say it was worth it, because it's just who he is as a person. He has to be right. And he has to feel like he has control over every situation. And he kind of does on LIV. Like, he's changed his destiny. So, but that would be interesting. I would love to know the answer to that myself.
So same situation. If you ask Jay Monahan, what question are you asking him, and what do you think his answer is?
Jay, what the fuck were you thinking? I mean, if you go back to April of 2021, I lay all this stuff out in the book. We're talking earlier about the history of the Premier Golf League, when Robby asked me about that. And that hasn't been reported. This is one of my mandates for this book, was to really explain to people what was really happening, because this whole story happened in the shadows. And every conversation, every deal, every time the money moved around, there was no press release, there was no press conference. No one knew what was really going on. And so it was kind of this legend that Monahan had turned down the Saudis, but no one knew the particulars of it. And I was able to crack the code. And in April 2021, Majed Al Saror, like the number 2 guy in this whole story for the Saudis, until he suddenly he wasn't. That's a whole other story. But he sent Monahan a letter, and throughout 2020, the Saudis were aligned with the Premier Golf League, and they were going to invest in the Premier Golf League. Then Monahan came in, crushed the Premier Golf League, created a strategic alliance with the European Tour, and all of a sudden the Saudis realized, we can't partner with the PGL, we can't partner with the European Tour. Let's try the PGA Tour. And so Al Saror sent this letter to Monahan and said, we'd like to partner with you. We'd like to invest in you. Let's get together and talk about it. And not only did Monahan ignore him, he went into a board meeting and he was asked by Charlie Hoffman, one of the player directors, like, why are we not talking to these Saudi guys? Like, there was a lot of noise around this. Why don't we have a meeting? And Monahan barks out, we do not negotiate with people who are trying to ruin the golf ecosystem and put us out of business. We are at war. We are at war with the Saudis. And that touched off this entire era, that pugnaciousness, that attitude filtered all the way down through the membership and defined the last 2.5 years. And, Monahan made it, it wasn't about business, it became very personal. He vilified the Saudis. He brought the 9/11 families into the conversation, and he made some fatal mistakes. Well, maybe not fatal, because he may survive this, but he made some monumental mistakes along the way. Now he's trying to put things back together, and he may salvage it. He may still get the Saudi money and still maintain control of the bureaucracy, but it will have been 3 years of strife and heartache and disillusioning for a lot of golf fans. He will have destroyed the trajectory of a lot of his best and favorite players who went to LIV. If you gave him a time machine, I'm not true serum, but if you gave him a time machine, I'm sure he'd go back to April of 2021, pick up the phone, call Majed, see if they could cut a deal. Instead of having those negotiations now, with Congress watching, with all the controversy, all the bitchiness. He touched off the whole era. And, that letter had never been public before until it was in my book. There's a lot of the details around this people hadn't known, and it gives you a better understanding of Monahan's role and decision-making in all of this.
So what does golf look like in, let's say, 5 years?
That's interesting. I have a story that dropped on firepitcollective.com this week, and it gets into the tenuous state of the framework agreement and all this money that's trying to pour into the game, and even the Middle East politics and how that's become a factor. And, the framework agreement looked like a contract, like a legal document, but really it was just pinky promises. Like, let's try and work together. There was nothing binding in that. There was no hammer. And so as this has become more widely known and considered, a lot of US companies have realized we can maybe buy into this deal. it's Silicon Valley VCs, it's New York private equity, it's the big Hollywood agency Endeavor and all their various parent companies. And so there's up to 10 bidders right now who are trying to get in on this deal. And it's the fundamental question is, are the Saudis going to be part of it or not? Because the tour needs this investment, because Monahan wrote a bunch of checks he can't cash. The tour is running out of money, and he's promised to pay the players all of this dough. He needs the investment, and they're looking for $2 billion. The Saudis are going to put it all in. But if you can bring in some of these outside companies and dilute their influence, it becomes a much easier sell to the players, to a lot of golf fans, and certainly to the United States Congress, which is monitoring this deal for antitrust and other reasons. And so it makes a ton of sense from the tour's standpoint. Keep the Saudis in the deal, kind of eliminates LIV as a serious competitor. You still get the money, everybody's happy. But for the Saudis, the Public Investment Fund wants to have a position of dominance in every deal. That's how they do it. That's why they pay a premium, because they want total control. And so are they willing to be downgraded into just another kind of minority investor? We're going to find out, but it's a risk for the PGA Tour, because if the PIF pulls out, the tour can still get the money, but now LIV goes back to being a fierce competitor, and Yasir is pissed off and he still has the checkbook, and they could start rating a bunch of the top players. But I think in talking to people around the tour and leadership and players, like, I definitely detect this new kind of swagger from the tour, because they've realized we can still get $2 billion, no problem. Other people are lining up to give us their money. So we can be well capitalized. And to some degree, LIV Golf has taken its best swing already. And the tour survived it. I mean, as long as it keeps Tiger and Rory and Jordan and John Rahm, and we'll throw Justin Thomas in there too, like, those guys don't appear to be going anywhere. Like, they're loyal to the tour and they're loyal to Tiger. Then you can lose, the next tier of players, because they're replaceable. A Patrick Cantlay can be replaced by a Ludwig Aubert, no problem. Now, if Rory went to LIV, that's devastating. We know that's not going to happen. But that next tier of guys are somewhat interchangeable. They're good players. They're of mild interest, but they don't move the needle. They don't sell tickets. They don't drive TV ratings. So I think the tour is less afraid of going back to the pre-framework deal, because they'll be in a much stronger position financially. And I think they've realized, as long as we have our core guys, we're going to be okay. So they may be willing to part ways with the Saudis, and then it gets interesting.
Yeah. Well, it is an incredible story, and one that even though your book is out, the story is ongoing. But just to shift to a little fun, we love golf stories. We know you and the Fire Pit Collective love golf stories. We always ask everybody, what is the story of your best golf shot?
Oh, man. There's so many to choose from. I mean, it's like,
Well, that's unlike most others. They say, well, I don't have one yet.
Well, I mean, it has to be so. I'm kidding, by the way. There's not that many great shots in my life. I mean, probably 5 or 6 years ago, I wrote a column for Golf Magazine complaining about having never made a hole-in-one. And all these 6-year-olds playing the first round of golf, they hit these ground balls that go in the hole. You get these blind old ladies, it bounces off a tree, goes in the hole. And I was like, just bitter. It never happened to me. And so last year I was doing the 100-hole hike, fundraiser for Youth on Course. I did it at Peter Hay Golf Course in Pebble Beach, all these little par threes. And it's a fundraiser. So I put out on socials, like, okay, if I don't make an ace, I'll donate $1,000 to Youth on Course. But if I do make one, all you jabronis out there who've been chirping at me for like all these years have to donate something, even if it's $5. And so it created like a lot of this energy. And so we sent a camera guy around to record every hole. Poor guy. I mean, how bored was he? So I'm going around the hay. I'm like on my 9th loop. I'm running out of holes. I'm like on the 82nd hole, which is actually, it turned out to be, it's the toughest little green on Peter Hay. It's really shallow and there's this big ridge. Still, it was only like, 62 yards. It's not beefy, but it was hard as hell. And I hit this beautiful little 60-degree, and I was aiming for this little brown spot on this swale, because I knew the ball would trickle back to the hole, and it landed like right on the brown spot. And we'd played the hole now a few times. Like I knew it was going to be close, and like it got really quiet as the ball was sucking back to the hole, and it went in. And I still remember when, you could hear it hit the stick and disappeared, and everyone froze. Like no one did anything for like a solid second. It was just utter disbelief. And then it was pandemonium. And so given that I had created this, people are tuned in and asking for updates, and there was a freaking camera guy there. And now admittedly 62-yard par 3 on a par 3 course you've already played a million times in the same day. I recognize it might deserve a tiny asterisk, but I did clip that little 60 perfect, and it landed on this dime sized little old pitch mark. So I think that has to count as my best shot.
Absolutely. Aim small, miss small, right?
yeah, totally. So that was fun. And
that's
we
awesome.
All credit to the Twitter sphere. I think Youth on Course raised like $15,000. People like stepped up and donated a lot of money. So
good for them.
It was all for the kids. It's not about me. It's about the kids.
Absolutely.
Well, I know we're up against a hard stop. You said you've got another probably 60 other interviews ready to go, but we did want to know, who would you pick to play you in a movie whenever Live and Let Die gets transitioned over?
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, there's a guy on Yellowstone who people think I look like. He's got like dark hair and green eyes. I don't even know his name. He's definitely better looking.
The brother, right? The brother.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I don't watch Yellowstone. He's definitely better looking than I am, so I would be okay with that. I'm trying to think of it through the years. People compare me to John Travolta, John Stamos, Ray Romano. I don't know. Not Ray, but I once took a shot at Ray when he was playing in Pebble Beach for how slow he was playing. And he went on the Tonight Show and waved around the Sports Illustrated article, and he was calling me Andy Stepnick. He got the name wrong. He's like, if I ever said Andy Stepnick guy, it was like a whole thing for like a week. It was fantastic. So I don't know if Ray's gonna take the part, but I don't know. We'll take.
There'll be people lining up, I'm sure, to play your role.
I mean,
Matt Damon.
Yeah, sure, you'd be good. I mean, doesn't probably have good enough hair, but we've there has been talk from Hollywood folks have been in touch, because it's just such a juicy story with so many protagonists and so many big themes and so much sort of geopolitical intrigue. So it's all talk until someone actually writes a check and gets it done, but it's fun to think about. I need to come up with a better answer for that. You've given me some things to consider here, Jonathan, but yeah, I don't know. That's a good one. I'm open to suggestions if as long as if you say Danny DeVito, I'm definitely ending this podcast. Yeah. But
not at all. Well, Alan, this has been great. We really appreciate it. I was telling somebody that we were doing this, and I was reading the book, and man, if you want a book about money, power, politics, world affairs, human rights, sports, you absolutely need to go get a copy of Live and Let Die by Alan Shipnuck. And I'll read, you mentioned it started with a simple idea, right, from a lawyer in London. And I'll read this as we close. It was a simple idea, really, to make professional golf slightly different, a tad more fun. The idea corrupted those with a lust for power and a craving for gold. It was weaponized by politicians, pundits, dreamers, trolls, hucksters, and hypocrites. That little idea sparked a war and a fragile peace that changed golf forever. Alan, you've done a great job covering both sides of this drama, this history that's unfolding, this story. But we appreciate you being a part of the Whole Story podcast.
I'm delighted to be here, and I love what you guys are doing. Like, I don't need a podcast that's been around for 20 years and has a zillion subscribers. Like, you guys have the passion, you have the love for it, and so it's awesome to be a part of it, and I appreciate you giving me the time.
Yeah, well, we love great golf stories. This is one. Your hole-in-one story on the hay is pretty awesome as well. So for Alan, for Jonathan, this is Robby. We appreciate everybody listening to the Whole Story podcast.